this is Art Napolitano, and it's my honor and a privilege to get to interview today Dr. Michael Lewis. Now, recently, Dr. Lewis and I became friends. He and his beautiful wife, Melissa, and their two children actually came up here to visit at Lake Winnipesaukee when they were on a holiday. And so we got to talk about Zinzino. We got to talk about his career. And I really believe his entire story should be in a book or a movie. Let me just read some of his background to you. Dr. Lewis is the president and founder of the Brain Health Education and Research Institute. He's an expert on nutritional interventions for the brain health, particularly the use of omega-3 fatty acids for the prevention, management, and rehabilitation of concussions and traumatic brain injury. He founded the Brain Health Education and Research Institute back in 2011 after he retired as a colonel in 31 years in the U.S. Army, where he was an Army Ranger. His pioneering work in the military and since has helped thousands of people around the world. He's been regularly featured in the media, including C-SPAN, Fox News, CNN, Sanjay Gupta. He's an MD, along with, he's been on thousands of radio shows and podcasts. He's a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and Tulane University Medical School. Dr. Lewis is a board certified and a fellow of the American College of Preventive Medicine and the American College of Nutrition. He's completed postgraduate training at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, Johns Hopkins University, and Walter Reed Army Institute Research. He's currently has a private practice in Potomac, Maryland. He's a consultant to several organizations, institutes, and nutrition companies around the world. He's a founding member of the Pop Warner Youth Football Medical Advisory Board. He's on the board of directors for the National Collegiate Rugby. And I'll tell you a few other stories. He's an infectious disease hunter. He was on the ground when SARS broke. In the military, he was doing some work in Russia at the time, and something happened. He was telling me the story. He ended up captive by the KGB, and thankfully the U.S. saw value to actually bring him and some of his mates back. He's had prestigious patients, including, I guess, 2- and 3-star generals and the clerk of the Supreme Court. So you can imagine how excited I am to be able to have him be a partner, an independent partner in the Zinzino business. So when I looked at Zinzino, for me, I asked, is the science real? Is the product valid? Is it legitimate? So I'm proud to say Dr. Lewis is now a friend of mine. And Dr. Lewis, thank you for taking time to be with us today.
All right, it's absolutely my pleasure. I can't think of a better place to be other than talking with you.
Well, again, thanks you for taking time. We certainly had a great time when you visited the lake. And what I want our viewers to know right now is a little bit more about yourself. How did you end up in the research area of omega-3, and why is omega-3 so important for us?
Well, it goes back to my military career. Out of West Point, I was commissioned a second lieutenant in Army intelligence, went through Ranger School and Airborne School, learned how to jump out of airplanes, all that kind of good stuff. Stationed up on the DMZ of Korea, and then of a light infantry unit out of California. And I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do long term. I had always wanted to be a doctor, so I ended up applying and going to Tulane Medical School down in New Orleans. And out of that, I absolutely was convinced I was going to be a surgeon. But then I got assigned at the Pentagon to do general practice for a couple of years, waiting for the urology residency a position to open up. And there I was in charge of all kinds of things. I was ran the primary care clinic, the flight medicine clinic, the executive medicine clinic, the travel medicine clinic, and all the emergency services for the 28,000 people that work at the Pentagon. But I was also personally responsible for taking care of the Army Chief of Staff, the 4-star general, the Vice Chief of Staff. And so one of my favorite patients was a retired head of the Army lawyer, JAG Corps, who was the chief clerk of the U.S. Supreme Court. And going over there for an insider view and holding the Bible that George Washington used to swear the oath on was pretty cool. So lots of great experience, but then I just wanted something different. So I ended up going into preventive medicine, how to keep people healthy and out of hospitals. And with that, in the training through Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, it was really focused on infectious diseases. And so, with all this great experience, they sent me over to Bangkok, Thailand, and I ran around Asia. My job was literally to run around Asia looking for new and interesting diseases, disease hunter, and setting up systems to find it. And I was there when SARS happened, when bird flu happened, and then the Army said, well, you got all this great experience, come back teach at the medical school in Bethesda. And I didn't want to, but they're like, we're the Army, we're not giving you a choice. And now Iraq and Afghanistan are going on, and there's wounded warriors everywhere. And take a long story and try to keep it a little bit shorter, kind of put two and two together, came up with this odd number, and went to the head of research at the Brain Injury Center and said, hey, is anybody looking at the use of omega-3s like you would get from fish oil to help our soldiers recover from traumatic brain injury? And he thought about it for a second. He was an Irishman, actually, and he thought about it for a second, and no, why don't you? And it's like, 'cause I do infectious disease. I do this. I kept making every excuse. And he goes, but you're the only one asking the question. And unfortunately, it's not expanded a whole lot there. I didn't know anything about omega-3s. I didn't know anything about traumatic brain injury. So I had to teach myself very quickly and learn who was who in the world, and got to know all three or four experts in the world because there weren't very many. And just it just exploded from there. And I was just fortunate that I had a couple of instances, like we'll probably talk about the case of Bobby, one of the patients, but also getting with a colleague at the National Institutes of Health and doing a study on suicide. So it just made everything explode in one way. But I also look back now, almost 20 years later, and how much we haven't yet got done, and how much more there is still to do.
Lewis, the first time I heard your name was through a common friend we have in Stuart Tonk, who was the global ambassador and educator for Nordic Naturals, which was been the largest selling fish oil omega-3 product in the world. And I was talking to him about Dr. Paul Clayton, who's Zinzino's chief science officer, and he had a book called Out of the Fire. And we read the book, and I heard your name, and he mentioned the study that you published on active military suicides. And then I realized that you were referenced in one of the chapters in Dr. Paul Clayton's book, Out of the Fire. And so I went to the back and I went to the references, and I then looked up your study on PubMed. It's just incredible. So, what did you learn about that role of omega-6 to omega-3 in brain health from that study?
Well, it's funny how studies like that get done, or at least this one was rather interesting. Is as I was getting to know the who's who knew anything about omega-3s in the brain, I started to become friends with a psychiatrist at the National Institutes of Health, a guy named Dr. Joe Hiblin. And we were having a beer one night, and he said, if we could just draw blood on people before they commit suicide, we could answer a lot of questions. I'm like, well, that's easy. Why didn't you tell me that before? And he looked at me like I was crazy. Like, how do you know who's going to commit suicide? And like, the Army's got tens of millions of blood samples in a freezer about 2 miles away from here. Let's go grab some and test them. And so we put together a study, got it through all the approvals and everything. And we looked at we wanted to start after 9/11, and we wanted 100 active duty suicides a year. And at that time, there was 800. So we end up with 800 active duty suicides. And I'll have to explain that for a quick second, is that it turned out we underestimated. Turned out there was 3,200 suicides during that same period. We only chose 100 a year. So we could have actually done an even bigger study. We didn't know it at the time. But when somebody dies on active duty in the military, there's a whole investigation. And it doesn't go, it's not labeled a suicide unless it's absolutely double and triple check confirmed that it was a suicide. So these were well-documented suicides, and that's important to know. There was no question about it. But the interesting thing, and then we took 800 well-matched controls. But the interesting thing that I found retrospectively, not only was there 3,200 suicides during that period, but that because we only chose 800 of them, we were able to get blood work on people that had blood work just within the last 4 to 6 months prior to committing suicide. And so when we tested it, we found that number one, 95% of all 1,600 samples had really low omega-3 levels. And in fact, their DHA levels were below 2%, which is profoundly low. So that was our first finding, was how low everybody's was. But even when we looked at that, it still worked out to be a 62% increased risk of suicide if somebody had a low omega-3 level, specifically a DHA level of 2% or lower. And the third thing that we really concluded about that is that's something you could change for pennies a day. And yet we're looking at the pharmaceutical industry has looked at failure after failure after failure of trying to find a drug to help with traumatic brain injury when we're sitting on something that is cheap, it's ubiquitous. You could go to any pharmacy, any grocery store, and you could buy it for pennies a day, and we could change that trajectory. And yet it hasn't happened because science, whoever, I'm going to say science gets in the way as roadblocks sometimes. And I was literally told that by a four-star general, that the doctors in the Army don't want to do it because there's no science to prove that it's going to work, and they would rather do nothing than to try something.
You talk about Dr. Joe Hiblin, and I've had a chance to spend some time on the phone with him, and he actually became a Zinzino partner like yourself, and he credits you actually in the conversation I had with him to doing most of the research on that study. And Joe, Dr. Joe is amazing, and this is a guy with over 200 published studies. And when someone like yourself, someone like Dr. Hiblin, someone like Stewart align themselves with Zinzino, that makes me step back. I'm not an expert in health and wellness or omega-3. I've been direct to consumer marketing all my life for 35 years around the world. And the first thing I wanted to know, is the science real? Is this story of the deficiency of omega-3 real? Is this product really best in class? And this is an area where when you get involved with Zinzino, and I know your son Isaac's involved in well, that just gives myself and everyone involved in our team in the company more confidence in talking to people. So what is so important about this balance of omega-6 to omega-3, and how does that dry blood spot, we call it our balance test, and how does the balance oil, how does this play into it, and how important is it for us to really take this seriously?
Well, honestly, I could teach a semester-long course just about that one subject. But in a very quick summary, so omega-6s, I always say you can't talk about omega-3s without talking about omega-6s because they're the same coin, maybe different sides of the coin. So omega-6s and omega-3s are essential fatty acids, meaning our body can't make them, so we have to consume them. And the enzymes that are used to process the sixes and threes, to elongate them, desaturate them, to break up, to build them up, break them down, all those enzymes are exactly the same because nature intended for them to be in balance. So just two quick examples. Omega-6s, the downstream effect of omega-6s is pro-inflammatory in general, causing inflammation. Whereas the omega-3s, the downstream effect is to help resolve the inflammation. And for omega-6s, it's pro blood clotting, so that, you cut yourself, you want your blood to be able to clot. So omega-6s help with that process, whereas omega-3s help keep the blood from clotting. So you don't have a heart attack, for example. And so, that clotting is a delicate balance of too much, too little. You want that sweet spot in the middle. What's happened over really the last, since the Industrial Revolution, for example. So pre-Industrial Revolution, our diets and the way we consumed, and if we were to able to go back and draw blood on people and do a blood spot test, that balance would have been pretty close to one-to-one type of a balance between the omega-6s and omega-3s as nature intended. But as the Industrial Revolution carried on, and then particularly in the last 70 to 100 years, where we really, really kind of go back to the 1960s, post-World War II, where, there wasn't anything we couldn't do, right? We just came out of World War II. We've got vaccines. We conquered polio. It was just like we put a man on the moon. There's nothing we can do, can't do. And why do we still have starving children in Appalachia, for example, and not getting enough calories, or not let alone the rest of the world? And so they set out with the Farm Bill as an example to essentially create corporate farming. How do we grow the most calorically dense foods the cheapest way possible to be able to ship it around the world? And that food was principally soybean. And you say, well, I don't eat soybean. Well, it's actually the most farmed um, uh, agriculture in the U.S., even more than corn. And the amount of soybean, and particularly soybean oil, that has come into the market since around 1970 has gone up 16, 18 fold, probably higher now. And it's just really dramatically changed that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. It's the biggest source of omega-6s, and the seed oils that are derived from it. They say, well, I don't eat soybean oil. Yes, you do. You just don't know it. Omega-6s are if you look at the molecule itself, it's a very stiff molecule. And omega-3 is a very flexible molecule, just by where the nature of the double bonds are and this, that, and the other. But, think of it as just literally stiff and flexible. Well, you can imagine if you've got 25 to 1 of the stiff molecules in your cell membranes, particularly in your neurons and your brain, you kind of get, it's going to be a stiff membrane. And so that creates problems where nutrients and things just can't get in and out of your cells very easily than if you had a flexible membrane. And, so that's a big concern. But, I don't eat soybean oil. Well, because it's that shelf stable, that inflexible molecule, that's what we process foods with, and to be able to ship it around the world. And so that's one major source. The oils that we use for cooking is another major source. But the one place that you don't think about is, okay, well, I don't eat beef, I only eat chicken, and so on. Well, what's the chicken being fed? The chicken's probably being fed soybean. Literally, I can guarantee you that, because it's cheap and easy to produce. So it's ubiquitous throughout our food supply, and it has completely shifted that one-to-one balance to 25 to 1. In some cases, I've heard of even 125 to 1, out of balance of too many omega-6s to omega-3s. And, an easy way to think of it is talk about omega-6s being a stiff molecule and omega-3s being flexible. It's become, to where we become rigid because of how we're eating.
Well, you talk about the balance of omega-6 to omega-3, and I believe one of the reasons Stuart, yourself, Dr. Hiblin, and others are attracted is that we actually test, we don't guess. And we have been coining a phrase, that we want people to really research the most important number they don't know about their health, which is this balance. And we've tested over 1.5 million people, which is a large database, the largest we believe in the world on this subject. And we found that worldwide, 97% of people are out of balance. They start taking the balance oil, and within 4 months, we test them again, and 95% of them are within a 3-to-1 balance, which is, well, we're told is what science says we should be at, is 3-to-1. So my question, I guess, is why this balance oil over other products that I know you've promoted? I mean, you're a omega-3 researcher, you're an expert, and you're now supporting and endorsing this omega-3 Zinzino balance oil. Why?
Very simply, it's the best in the best in class. It's the best uh, fish oil or fish oil combination omega-3 delivery system that I've ever come across in the 20 years that I've been in this space. And you have to understand, and I know way too much about the manufacturing processes, unfortunately. Um, and you have to understand, in basic terms, you take a bunch of small fish and you grind them up and you squeeze the oil out of them, and you get what's called a triglyceride, principally a triglyceride. It's a glycerin backbone with three fatty acids off of it, right? So a triglyceride. And what they do is in the manufacturing process, they have to clean it, right? We don't want the mercury and the heavy metals and the PCBs and all that. So you have to clean it. And so the way that the industry cleans this at this point is they break that glycerin backbone, but now you have these free fatty acids, which are really unstable. Just like sodium needs chloride to be a stable table salt. You've got to have something, an acid base type of thing to keep the free fatty acids stable. So they combine it with an alcohol molecule. And so now you have an alcohol molecule tied to an omega-3 or an omega-6, and to keep it stable. And that allows them to separate that out, and you can get rid of all the bad stuff. And while you're focusing on the EPA and the DHA, the two main types of omega-3s, while you're doing that, that alcohol molecule is called an ethyl ester. And the cheapest thing is you just put it into a capsule and sell it. And that's what the pharmaceutical industry does, in fact. Now they concentrate it a little bit more. But they focus on the EPA and the DHA, and they concentrate it and put it in a bottle, put it in a pill that they'll sell to you for $35 a pill. And so it's the cheapest manufacturing that you could imagine. So it's only some of the best companies in the world, which are actually all nutritional companies, that then reverse that process. And they take that alcohol ethyl ester and they reverse the process and they put the glycerin backbone back on the free fatty acids and put it back into a reconstituted triglyceride form that you know from nature. And so our bodies can digest it. We can't digest those ethyl esters. We don't have the enzymes. We don't have it takes tens and tens of thousands of years to develop the ability to digest these things. So with triglycerides, it's back into a natural form, or at least a reconstituted natural form that we can digest, and you can get much better, blood levels very quickly. Not too quickly, but quick enough by using that reconstituted triglyceride form. One minor problem with that, just like when you take milk, right, and you take raw milk, raw cow's milk, which is, I've never tasted it, but I understand, like, it's unbelievable. It's packed full of all kinds of good nutrition, but we don't ever sell raw milk, right? Because 100, 200 years ago, it might kill you. And so we pasteurize and homogenize the shit out of it, literally, and destroy all the goodness in the milk so much, then we have to add some vitamins and some calcium back in there to make it even reasonable. Well, that's the same thing with fish oil, but we don't even add the good stuff back in. So when you go through that cleaning process that I described, you're taking not just the bad stuff out. By the way, there's not a single supplement on the market, even from the worst companies, not a single supplement on the market that has an issue with mercury and heavy metals. That's a total myth because of this cleaning process. But when you clean all the heavy metals and such out, you're also taking away a lot of the good stuff out because we're so focused on the EPA and DHA that we eliminate what's called the polyphenols that accumulate just like the omega-3s do. And starting from the source at algae, right? There's a company I was online to be the chief medical officer for when I retired from the military, and they focus on algae-derived omega-3 supplements. And unfortunately, they got bought out right as I was retiring, and I lost my job before I ever got it. But it started as a NASA spinoff back in the 80s, where these NASA scientists asked a basic question: where do fish get their omega-3s? Well, because they actually don't naturally come with omega-3s. That's why we see some fish like salmon have high levels of omega-3s and other fish like tilapia that have very little. Fish don't come with omega-3s. They have to get it somewhere, and then it's sort of that bioaccumulation. Where did they get it? They get it from algae. But when you get it from algae, you're getting all the other good stuff, the polyphenols and stuff like that. So that's the sea-based plant source of omega-3s from the beginning. Well, the thing that I really like about Zinzino is and I've been asking for years, why don't we add some of that good stuff back in? Well, manufacturing wise, it's probably way too expensive, and you'd have to go back to the algae to really get all that. And what I really like about their balance oil is well, we can do that on land, and we can get those same, if not better, polyphenols and other things that are good for us. We can get them where we don't have to worry about the mercury and the heavy metals and that. We can get them from olives. And in fact, we can get it from, if you pull an olive before it is ripe enough to be then processed, you can really have the high levels of polyphenols that you would get from extra virgin olive oil. So that's the magic that they came up with, that they combined that land-based source of the polyphenols with the EPA and the DHA from the sea. And it's magic, in my opinion.
Dr. Lewis, I think of all of my family and friends that I've tested, my kids, and we're all out of balance. And we don't know the science. We could never repeat what you just said. But the fact that you're sharing this information with us, the fact that Zinzino has such a powerful advisory board and has so much documentation behind it, we have so much confidence to take the product. And it really, when you go, it's really difficult because we go into a health food store, there's all this stuff on the shelves. What are we going to take, a bag of pills every day? They always say exercise, eat right, but very few people can make those changes correctly. Yet a small little shot is simple to do. It's affordable. And this changed for me. I went from a 12 to 1, and I was taking omega-3, post a heart attack 3 years ago. And then I was really important. I was taking it, but I was still 12 to 1, but I switched over to the balance oil, saved money, and I dropped down to 3.3 to 1 within 4 months. So I'm proof it works. I know there's millions of people that need this product. So again, having you on board is giving us a lot of confidence. Now, I know you treat a lot of patients in your practice, and I've heard that you're actually including several of the Zinzino products as in part of their treatment or their follow-up. And I believe you were recommending some vitamins for your patients that were manufactured for NASA or from NASA, and you switched over to some of our products like the Extend. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Well, sure. I interact with patients in three basic ways. One is, direct private pay patients, one-on-one. I also see some patients through an orthopedic clinic, more of the acute concussion patients, local, that can come into the orthopedic clinic. And the third area is the veterans that I deal with, but we're also expanding that group. And so through my nonprofit. and trying to get a bigger reach out to veterans who may have gotten blown up, say in Iraq 20 years ago now, or 15 years ago, and they're now hitting their 40s, or getting closer to 50, give or take, and they're starting to have problems. They say the wheels are starting to come off the bus, right? And we think about like NFL players as they get older and how they start to spiral down, and have mental health issues. And it's very predictable once you get into that spiral. And veterans are not exempt for that. And also I work with some NFL players. And so as an example, so through those three outlets, I've been moving patients over with the nonprofit. We've had patients on protocols. I started with one company, went to a different company because I thought it was a little bit better, a little bit cheaper, and went on to a third company that works with NASA because better, cheaper, less expensive products. And comparing to what I've got with Zinzino, and we're in the process of moving things over. I always think, people want to hear the science, but they remember the stories. And so there's one NFL player that we just started to work with very recently. And within 1 month, now we track 22 question symptom inventory on a scale of 0 to 6, and total it up and all that. And one former NFL player never became big in the NFL, but he was an All-American in college and so on. Um, Having issues, wheels are coming off the bus, and he had a 75% improvement in his symptom score, which is huge. And it was only on the Zinzino products, the basic. So what I've designed is to use the Zinzino products, starting with the balance oil, of course. But then I started to add in the Extend, and I like the Extend Plus, the vegan version. I just think there's a little extra for another extra $10. You get so much more, in my opinion. But then also the Viva Plus, which is a nootropic based on saffron, which is known to be, it's probably like the next big super brain supplement, really. And Zinzino's just ahead of everybody on that, or most people. So the Viva Plus, and then they just recently came out with the Xeno Gene, which is a really interesting thing. Kind of adds all the last missing pieces that I was looking for in a comprehensive program, where it adds in things like CoQ10 and some other things that are good for the brain, but it also helps kind of clear out some of the old, tired, bad cells, and helps sort of with the cleaning process. So I really focused on those four. And now recently, after hearing Paul Clayton give a great talk recently on the xenobiotic, and it's not a probiotic, it's actually more of a prebiotic, fiber-based, and how it changes the gut flora. I'm convinced that's I'm adding that in as a fifth product as a pack. I call it the brain pack, or Z brain pack for Zinzino. And those now going to be 5 products, and it's going to cost some money, but if you want to get your health back, it should be worth it. And I always ask people, hey, you mentioned it. I always talk about diet and exercise, lifestyle medicine. You've got to make some changes. You've got to, one of the myths about concussions is go sit in a dark room until you get better. No, it's absolutely the worst, wrong advice. You need to have an active recovery. And so you need to be walking at a minimum, or exercising, to help that blood flow to the brain. So you need exercise. You need to get your diet straight. You need to cut those omega-6s, that soybean oil and vegetable oils and processed foods out, and sugars. You need to cut those out as much as possible. But then the third part is that targeted nutritional therapy, and that now is 100% for me, that 4 or 5 pack of Zinzino products. So I tell patients, if you want to get healthy, you're going to have to invest in your health.
We invest in paying for car insurance, home insurance. Why wouldn't we want to invest in a little bit of our health insurance in terms of nutritional health insurance with products like this? When I was looking for a new opportunity after 35 years in the direct-to-consumer marketing, uh, Dr. Mike, I looked at so many companies, but it was the science of Zinzino that stood apart. And I know the only reason you're here is the mission and the quality of what we're doing and the fact we're testing and not guessing. And I look at what you mentioned, Dr. Paul Clayton, and you mentioned xenobiotic. Well, we're working on, and it's been 7 years in process, a new test that will help people understand if they have what's called leaky gut. And then we want to be able to show them what we have and how our product can help them there. So again, Zinzino is pushing to stay ahead of the curve, and that's why I endorse this to everyone. Now, I just want to mention to all of our viewers that you authored a book called When Brains Collided. When Brains Collide. Stacy and I had been reading the book. We found it a conversational read. It was not so sciencey that I was struggling with the language. It told great stories. You say in the book that every parent and athlete should know about this subject because you can prevent or try to prevent concussions, and certainly when it comes to head injuries, there's important parts of how to treat them. And you also say on the back of the book, there's nearly a 20% chance that you or someone close to you will suffer a concussion this year. So I suggest people search Amazon or somewhere and just get the book. They're going to enjoy it. They're going to learn a lot. But the part of the book I want you to talk about now is it's something you're famous for, is the story of Bobby. And you were interviewed on CNN. I actually searched for it. I found the link. I shared it with a lot of people. Dr. Sonia Gupta, I said it right this time. Dr.
Gupta,
Sonia
Gupta.
Gupta. He interviewed you, and the story was amazing because it was a young guy that had been through a car accident and had a coma and was basically what we would call brain dead. What happened, and how did you get involved in that, and what was the result of your intense treatment you did with him?
Well, it's, I don't want to spoil the book because that's how I introduced the whole book. But and it goes in a little bit more detail, but the short of it is I was aware of an accident in the local DC area where a kid had wrapped sure, Bobby had taken the family car with his cousin while his parents were out of town, and they were out joyriding on those windy, dark roads that are barely 2 lanes wide, and failed to negotiate a curve and wrap the car around a tree. Killed his cousin. It took him an hour and a half. The car was so mangled, it took him an hour and a half to get Bobby out of the car and onto a medevac helicopter. The parents were called and told, get here, we need to just pull the plug. The kid has no chance of surviving. And the parents refused to believe that and reached out through some friends. And one of those friends worked at the FDA, and he gives me a call. And I can't make this up. I'm in uniform, full dress uniform, on the steps of the US Capitol for Brain Injury Awareness Day in 2010. And I get 2009, I think, anyway, I forget the year, but get a call from this guy, and I'm like, oh, now I'm in trouble. The FDA's calling me, and he goes, no, this is personal. I've got a friend, blah, blah, and would you talk to the father about using omega-3s? I'm like, it's never been done before. So the next day, the neurosurgeon calls me. I was in Joe Hiblin's office, as a matter of fact, when the neurosurgeon calls me and says, what is it that you want us to do? And it's like, what do you want to do? You just want to pull the plug and let the kid die. Why don't you try this? Just start pouring fish oil down his feeding tube. You got nothing to lose. And the doctor, to her credit, did. And so the very short of the story is Bobby went to his high school graduation 3 months later and was discharged to home on the fourth or fifth month, and has gone on to live like a stroke survivor. He's, some weakness and so on. but has gone on to live as good a life as you could ever expect. He lives out in the LA area in an apartment, with a roommate or by himself. He's working, finished a college degree, got a, working, making a living. So I would call that a pretty good success. So that's how now you don't have to read the introduction to the book, but no, just kidding. But the book is really, I kind of laugh. It's really part autobiography. I do tell a lot of stories, and my audience was absolutely 100% meant to be, I'm going to call it the euphemistic soccer mom in the Midwest, for example. That's who I speak to, as the mom who doesn't know anything about the science, but knows that she'll do anything to help her kid recover from a concussion after playing soccer or football or lacrosse or whatever. And so that's my audience. I get criticized because I don't have this big laundry list of references, although I do reference studies and stuff throughout the book, but I don't have this long laundry list of references because I didn't want to write a textbook. I wanted to write a book for that soccer mom out there. So I say, if I could do anything, if I could be published somewhere, would I rather be published in the New England Journal of Medicine or People Magazine? I'd choose People Magazine every single time because more people will read it and more people will do something about it.
I've loved the book. I recommend it to everyone, even soccer dads. But one final story. Everything I believe happens for a reason. It was crazy when Stuart mentioned your name and that you were evaluating the products, the science, and could be getting involved in. And then I saw in Dr. Clayton's book that you were a reference, one of the studies. And then when we got to know each other, you told me that many years before, you had heard the name Zinzino. In fact, if things had turned out differently, you might have been the Dr. Paul Clayton. You might have been the chief science officer here. Can you tell us a little bit about that crazy story?
Well, first of all, I would say there's no replacement for Paul Clayton. He's just absolutely brilliant. And, would I been a colleague of Dr. Clayton's, I would only, that would be like a dream come true because he is phenomenal and there is no replacing him. So I wouldn't have been the Paul Clayton. Paul Clayton's is unique and we should value him for that. But as I was reaching trying to figure out, and Stuart was introducing me to it. I was like, I typed in, what's the name of that company again? Starts with a Z, and I started ZIN, and in my email up popped this email from 2013 from this company. I forget exactly who, but I think it was I can never say his name, Orion Sally.
Yes.
If I said that correctly, and I apologize if I butchered that. I'll have to learn that. I have to get that one. I could say great things like, arachidonyl ethanolamide, like it's second nature, but Norwegian names don't always come so easy. Um, so all of a sudden what is this email from 2013, 11 years ago? And I look at it, and basically they were saying, hey, we're working with this company Zinzino, and we've got this great project that we're embarking upon, and we want to talk to you about it. And there's no more emails. I don't know what happened, why we didn't connect. But it was 11 years ago, and then Stuart comes around reintroducing me to this company Zinzino. I was like, that was the project that they wanted to talk to me about 11 years ago, and now it's matured and growing, and now they're coming into the US. So serendipity. I would have been nice to be involved in Zinzino 11 years ago, absolutely, but you can't go back. And it allowed Zinzino to mature as a company and come out with these great products. So I think I'm in the right place at the right time.
Well, I'm so grateful that you are here and more grateful that we've become friends. I can't wait for us to get together socially again. Hopefully next summer we'll get you back up with your family. I would like to meet Isaac as well, as the two younger ones. So again, thank you for taking your time with us today and sharing all this incredible background information. Again, I strongly suggest people pick up the book, When Brains Collide. This will really help further your education about our product, well, about omega-3 supplementation. Again, you're just an amazing individual. I can't wait for the movie. Anyway, thank you,
So who's
Dr.
going to
Lewis,
play
for being
me?
with us.
So who's
We
going
have
to
to
play
find
me?
I don't know if there's any Hollywood actors good enough looking. You have to play yourself.
All right. Could I wrap up with one little story?
Please do.
I
Please do.
When I was at the Pentagon back in the 90s, I was at an event with the chief of staff of the Army and the protocol people kept trying to drag me over. It was sort of a cocktail-like setting, kept trying to drag me over to meet this actor who was an ambassador to the Army. And like I had never heard of him. And they kept trying to drag me over. Well, he was in this movie Goonies, and never heard of him, never saw it. He was in the movie Rudy, never saw it. No, I never heard of him. And they're like, he's Patty Duke Austin's son. I'm like, well, I know who she is. Well, they dragged him over to me, and it was Sean Astin. And he turns around and he looks at me, and we're like the same height, same kind of curly hair. And he looks at me and goes, I feel like I'm looking in a mirror. And we had the best time talking for about 10, 15 minutes. He just basically pushed everybody else away, like, hey, I'm having a great conversation here. So
Funny,
so
actually, Rudy was one of my favorite movies. One of my seminars over the years, I actually got the official Rudiger, the guy the movie was about, to speak
right.
at one of my seminars, because he was one of those great stories that you love, that is the underdog that went out and did it. And
Yeah.
so, and a lot of times with our business in general, that's what's so great about our type of marketing. You don't have to have the resume, the degrees, the background that you have, Dr. Hiblin and Stewart. You just got to be looking for a change in your life. We try products all the time. We're influenced by television, media, online marketing, and you never really know if what you have is the real deal. But when we hear people like you that are willing to put your reputation behind this, that speaks volumes for all of us. It's actually priceless that you're doing this interview for so many people. I can't thank you enough for giving, because you are giving right now. You're giving all of us opportunity to go from that underdog to someone special, because we can impact people's life. My goal with Zinzino, Dr. Mike, is to impact 1 million people's health. And through this type of marketing, we can do that. It's a grassroots effort. We're not taking to television. We're going person to person. That's what got Stewart's attention. He couldn't believe that we actually tested so many people face to face. And he said, that's it. He goes, wow, that's why this is working, because a friend can get a friend, and we call it the tipping point. They make that decision. So thank you for playing a huge role in this for us, bigger role than I think you know. I look forward to helping you and Isaac develop the business part of it. And I'm sure this video is going to be super popular with everyone. So thank you, sir. I appreciate you so much.
Well, you're very welcome, Art. And I say, I'm still young enough and naive enough to think I can change the world. And, with you, I think we can do it.
Well, let's do it together.